This is the Healthy Business Podcast, the show for ambitious business owners who want to grow and scale in a healthy way. I'm Sarah Cook, and I'll be sharing with you tips, inspiration, and proven methods from leading business experts, entrepreneurs, and health and wellness professionals to help you grow your business with more income and having more impact, but in a way that works for you. Because when you have clarity and strategy, you can achieve the results you want. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Healthy Business Podcast. I am delighted to be joined by Emma Matthews, who is an expert on burnout. And I know this is a topic that keeps coming up in different guises. So I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes, but also I'm sure we'll have lots of tips for not just recovering from burnout, but actually the warning signs on how you can prevent burnout, which, as you know, is very close to my heart. So Emma, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. Really delighted to be here today.
Oh, I think burnout's one of those things, isn't it? It's such a big topic that we're hearing lots and lots about, especially over the last couple of years. But there are so many things that we can do to prevent it, but also recognizing those signs. So I'm excited to see where that goes and different bits that we can pull out and really help the listeners today. But before we get into that, I'd love to ask you a question, and it's one that I ask all of my guest experts and interviewees, is what a healthy business means to you.
Oh, I love that question. And there's so many aspects to it for me. So at the core, for me to have a healthy business, I need to be doing work that I feel aligned with. And I've realized that through actually initially creating businesses that weren't fully aligned with who I am, and there just wasn't the longevity there. So I think definitely feeling aligned with the purpose of the business is a key piece. But also thinking long term, I've realized whenever I take more of a long term perspective to my decisions, I tend to just naturally think more about longevity, taking great care of myself and the business rather than trying to sprint through things. So those are my two things, thinking long term and alignment. That's what a healthy business means to me.
Amazing. Yeah, so important, isn't it? That alignment of really doing stuff that you enjoy doing, but actually kind of coming back to that and sense checking that as we grow as people, as we evolve, it's okay to kind of evolve your business and move things in a way, and just making sure that everything is in alignment all the time, which I think sometimes when people start, if you have been running your business for a long time, then you end up doing the things that you feel like you should be doing or that you've always done just because that's the status quo. And yeah, I think it's really important that we have that sense check with ourselves, isn't it? And go, actually, I am the business owner. I can make those changes. I can make it more in alignment with me as you're growing, as you're learning.
100%. And I just always think, what do I want to look back in hindsight and think about this chapter of my life? Do I want to be celebrating sticking with things that didn't serve me, or do I want to celebrate that actually I lived a really full life and did work that was meaningful to me? With that context, the right decisions feel a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. And that fulfillment. And I think that comes back to that long-term thinking that you were talking about as well, of really getting clear on what your goals are, what you're wanting to achieve life-wise as well as business-wise, and then making sure you're doing the right things to really kind of bring all that into alignment, but also that you're feeling good about it, which is so important. Feeling fulfilled, feeling happier, and that has a positive impact on our health as well.
100%. Yeah, there's such a big mind-body connection.
Yeah, definitely. And that, I suppose, leads us into burnout, which is what we're talking about today, as to, there are lots of reasons why people may experience burnout, but also lots of reasons in people that I'm seeing, especially at the moment, that are on that road to burnout, but don't necessarily realize that they are. And I know for me, I hit burnout a couple of times through my, corporate career, but also recognized that I was heading that way when I first set up my own business. And it manifests itself in completely different ways. And I think it's an interesting one, that it's not a cookie cutter approach in the same way that nothing ever is. It can affect people in different ways. So before we kind of delve into that a little bit more, what is burnout? So if people, it's a phrase that we hear a lot, a phrase that we, see in the press, see other people talking about, that we need to avoid it. But what is burnout?
Yeah, and the World Health Organization have defined it now. They define it as chronic workplace stress that hasn't been managed. So very much the formal definitions see it in a workplace context. But actually, in my experience working with clients, I often find that there's a family outside of work angle to it as well that can either help the situation or hinder the situation. If someone's really busy at work and then they've got lots of family responsibilities with little support, that person is much more likely to have more extreme burnout experience than, say, someone who it is just in a work context. So yeah, I find the definition interesting. I do very much relate to the it's something that's chronic, it's been happening for a period of time. So we wouldn't, for example, use the word burnout just to describe the kind of tiredness that a good night's sleep, a weekend, or even a week away that would fix. It's the type of feeling of lack of energy, kind of lack of passion, lack of motivation that takes some time to come out of, which is why prevention is so important. Once you've hit the wall with burnout, the recovery period can be quite extensive. So that's the World Health Organization definition. If you look at the research, they typically talk about things like feelings of physical and emotional exhaustion as one of the category buckets. You're also becoming more cynical and detached from your work, but it could be wider, it could be family, it could be relationships. And you also have that sense of, I'm just not accomplishing what I used to do. So they're the main three category buckets that are recognized. But exactly as you said, Sarah, it can manifest in so many different ways that it can be quite difficult to spot early on, which is why awareness is so important.
It's amazing, isn't it? I'm really, in some ways, surprised by that definition by the World Health Organization, because, and I've talked about this in previous episodes as well, of how I don't believe in this kind of work-life balance. Like, it's all life. Like, whatever we're doing is all life. Work is a pillar of that. And I think, similarly, almost reflects where burnout comes from. It can be any of those different things that affects us as people, and it's our lives that are being impacted on that. So yeah, it's really interesting that they relate it back to the workplace.
Yeah, I hope that definition broadens over time. For example, there's someone in my network who has two young children. She's a carer. She's not in quotation marks paid work, but she's burning out because of the demands on her. So I personally believe it's much wider than workplace. But I also celebrate that at least now burnout is recognized as something. When I hit it in 2017, there just wasn't any awareness. So it's a step forward, just not all the way there yet.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your experience, if you're happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. So for context, I was someone who went through the school system, didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I'm ashamed to say I literally looked at a league table of kind of different degrees you could do, earning potential. So I ended up going through the path of economics into banking, just because in the absence of actually feeling a real passion for something, I thought, well, I might as well be well paid for what I do. So I had quite an extensive career in the financial services industry. Did actually enjoy parts of it. Spent time in communications, and had a really interesting period working as like a right-hand person for a CEO. It was great. And then suddenly it felt to me kind of overnight things were not okay. But actually, with the benefit of hindsight, it was something that had been building for quite a long time. So I'm quite typical of many people that hit burnout, in that I was the person in the workplace who was the high performer, who really cared about the company, the organization, my colleagues. So I would always do whatever it took to get the work done. I'd always been in those environments where you kind of chuck me in at the deep end and I'll always come out the other side. But the final role that I took on in the corporate world was just, it was bigger than me to fix. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, I was doing the work of a whole team before the whole team was there. And gradually over time, that just culminated in my body getting to the stage that it was like, you've missed all of the signs, so I'm just going to take you out. So there was one Friday in the office, final meeting of the week, weekend was in sight. a problem came up in the session, and rather than my normal cool, calm, collected self saying, oh, I know how to fix that, or we'll take it away, come back to it Monday, it was almost like this fire had gone off in my head, and I just felt like I needed to run, to get out of the office. And I now realize that was just a really severe panic attack that I had in the office. So I kind of ran out of the building crying and just couldn't function after that. So that was the Friday night. By the Tuesday, I was sat in the doctor's office, kind of shaking, crying, no idea what had happened to me. And the doctor was like, you're going to have to go see a psychiatrist. So it was just very, very frightening. Didn't know what had happened to me. And then I was in a medical system that was talking to me about depression, anxiety, medication. But I can remember at the time feeling like that's not exactly what I've been experiencing. And it was only when, just through my own research, I think I came across Arianna Huffington's story online of how she'd experienced burnout, that I thought, that's what's happened to me.
So interesting, isn't it? Because it is a relatively new term, as we were talking about earlier, and so many people have experienced similar situations to you, but there wasn't a label for it. There wasn't anything that, you know, it could be sort of partitioned into a box for, I guess, and it became more of a, as well as you experienced, more of a kind of a mental health, emotional health struggle that doesn't tick all of those boxes that you've experienced.
Yeah, 100%. And for me, it was just frightening how seemingly it happened overnight. But actually, now I look back, I probably had symptoms for a good 6 months. I could probably go back a year and think, actually, that was probably what set off a start of a whole lot of symptoms. And just because I missed all of them, they got louder and louder and louder until it was almost like this volcanic eruption. So the work that really motivates me now is sharing that story, so for other people, they can do something about it much sooner.
It's so interesting. It's something that I'm really passionate about, because I see so many people in almost exactly the same situation that are almost blocking those warning signs out, of going, oh, I don't need to do anything, it's not serious, I'll wait until it is serious, or I'll wait until there is that kind of real trigger that is affecting my performance or affecting my business results or whatever it is. But I suppose from you sharing your story and doing things like this, which is what I wanted to do, is highlighting that actually in some ways it's a ticking time bomb, and that when that explosion in your head happens, or whatever that kind of final symptom is, it's almost too late, because you can do so many things before that to manage it, to make tweaks, and they don't even need to be big. And I think that's what's brilliant, is that we can really optimize our health. It's not even necessarily prioritizing it. You can optimize it so you're working in the best way to get the results that you want. But I see so many people that are just so focused on achieving what they want, trying to fast track everything as quickly as possible, and then going, oh, I'll deal with my health later. I'm just going to have that, whatever it is that's going to help me, you know, get through the next day, and living on, you know, I suppose we hear the typical stories of, you know, grabbing high sugar snacks and high caffeine and all that kind of stuff that keeps us going and going and going. But it can be more than that, can't it? You know, it is about the taking rest moments, having that self-care, so many different things. We'll move into more around actually what you can do later, but I think it's really interesting at this point to sort of say that, you know, everyone is different, and your experience of that road to burnout can be different depending on what's going on around you, depending on the situation that you're in. But really, I suppose being aware of it, that's the first key, isn't it? Being aware of some of those symptoms. And I think it might be useful to kind of share what potentially some of those symptoms could be, is almost not necessarily a checklist, but people that are listening to this going, you know, I've just felt a few things that have been off, or a bit tired, or that kind of thing. Is this the start of burnout, or am I further down that road than I thought? What sort of things do you help your clients with in kind of, I suppose, recognizing those symptoms, those early warning signs?
Yeah, and I love what you said about kind of checking in with yourself and awareness. I think the first sign really is that you just start to feel different to what you normally do. The challenge is a lot of people don't even have that awareness of natural state, because we're so focused on what work demands from us, what family needs from us. So the time spent actually checking in with our own mind and body, it can be quite small. But early signs can be starting to notice that you're more irritable about stuff. Perhaps your reaction to things is out of proportion with what's happened. So it could be quicker to anger, quicker to tears. That emotional, it's described a lot as emotional exhaustion, but that sense of I'm just not reacting in the way that I normally would is a big one. It can also be associated with lots of physical symptoms. So with some of my clients, it's been they've had pains in their stomach. I've also worked with people where there was kind of their hair started falling out. They had breakouts on their skin. So the physical spectrum is quite wide of what this can look like. So people that have the awareness that there's something wrong will quite often go into the medical system for treatment of that one specific symptom. And if the doctor doesn't connect the dots and see it as a stress response, that in itself can be quite damaging. It's almost like, yeah, just treating one symptom rather than the bigger problem. So that's a big one. Another one is your mind might start feeling a bit slower, like you've got cotton wool there. It's taking you longer to get the same amount of work done. You just feel less effective in the office. And then another big one is you're just becoming a bit more cynical about the work that you do, whether that's at home or the workplace. Feeling a bit detached is another one. Just you might start to avoid some social situations with friends or networking opportunities because you're like a battery that's draining. So the cost of doing certain things starts to feel too much. It's, oh, I'm not going to go have that difficult conversation. I'm just going to kind of sit, get on with it. Or I'm not going to that event at the weekend. I just don't feel like it. So these can be really micro changes over time that get louder, get more extreme over time.
So interesting, isn't it? And I think you're right. Each of those little things taken as a micro moment don't necessarily seem that big, but if you start noticing that you're doing that on a more regular basis and starting to see a bit of a pattern, that's when it's kind of like, okay, I need to start doing something about this. I'm starting to see these changes. There is this pattern. What can you do about it? And I think also we talked about it a little bit earlier, that self-awareness, like giving yourself permission to sense check yourself. You know yourself better than anybody, better than any medical professional, better than any partner or family member. You can see and spot the changes, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional. But if we don't give ourselves that time to sense check, then we're not going to notice them. And I think that's a really, really key thing. And almost an action off the back of this, listening to this, is just setting yourself even half an hour once a month going, how am I feeling? What is going on? And I always get people to do this from a business perspective when they're looking at their goals, of saying, okay, well, if I've hit my financial goals, what impact has that had on my lifestyle goals? And flip side, if I've hit my lifestyle goals, what impact has that on my business? But I might start adding in this as well, going, actually, how are you feeling? Because it's so important, so important. It's a big part of your lifestyle goals, but I think it's having that awareness is definitely that key first step in understanding what's going on, what changes that you potentially could make. So if people have started noticing a few changes, where do they go from there? If they don't necessarily want to go straight to the medical profession, if they realize it's more than just one of those micro changes that are going on, they're starting to see that pattern, what do people do next?
Yeah, so the way I look at it is they're all symptoms that show you that you're out of alignment. So it's asking the bigger question of what is causing this? Why am I reacting this way? If I'm feeling exhausted and cynical on a Sunday night, and anxious on a Monday, what is that anxiety, that cynicism trying to tell me at the moment? And it can come up for a variety of reasons. It can be, am I in a job that's just not the right fit for me? Or is it actually, I love what I do, but I'm not staying committed to my boundaries. Perhaps they've gradually eroded over time and I've just taken too much on. Is it that I don't have the right kind of balance between time for me, time for work, time for family? It can be so many different things, but the important thing is kind of sitting down, having that time for you. If that feels difficult to do, working with a coach, or even having someone like a colleague or a mentor holding space for you, can be really, really powerful in asking you the right questions.
So important, isn't it? And I think you made a really good point there, is that you don't need to do this on your own. Yes, it's important to get that awareness, that, you know, that time to really think about what is going on for you. But actually, if you don't know what to do about it, or if you, even if you notice that something is going on but you're not quite sure what, then getting support from somebody can be a great first step, whether it is someone qualified in sort of the burnout area, health and wellbeing area, or as you say, whether it's just a colleague and you're reaching out saying, I don't know what's going on, but something's going on, then that can just really help. Like, you don't need to do this on your own at all, do you?
Yeah. And the interesting thing with burnout is it's quite rare that it's just one person in a team that's affected. I talk about burnout being contagious. Quite often there's a burnout leader or a whole burnout team. So actually, if you are courageous and have some of these conversations in the workplace, it can open up, actually, I'm feeling like this as well. I'm feeling like this as well. And when there's a community of support in finding a solution, that really, really helps. It tends to be when you just feel isolated, when you're dealing with this on your own, that it becomes more serious.
Yeah, and I love that idea of actually making some collective changes, because if there's a few of you that are experiencing those, then it could be as straightforward to a certain degree, and I use that word with caution, but it could be straightforward in making some changes to the way you're working within the team, or, you know, the boundaries that you're putting, some agreed boundaries of, you know, the times of your hours or something like that. That can make a huge difference on how you're feeling and your wellness, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very difficult for, say, a leader to do something if they don't know there's a problem. So actually, if you're brave, reach out and say, look, this is what's happening. It gives them the opportunity to do something proactive as well. Because typically it is the high performers that care that are affected by this. So exactly the type of people that the organization wants to keep.
Yeah, I could resonate so much with your story that you shared earlier of kind of high performance, heading for all the, you know, awards that I was winning, the amount of events that I was organizing, and yeah, and then it all came kind of crashing down a little bit. So yeah, it's so interesting. I think that quite often it is those people that are used to pushing and pushing, but we don't take that time just to go, okay, let's just press pause, even though they probably know they should do, they don't know what to do or how to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've spoken a little bit around like warning signs, what potentially we can do about it. How, other than the sort of awareness and having that regular check-in with yourself, prevention methods, how can we get to that point where we are creating that space for ourselves to really prevent us getting there, other than, as I said, the sort of the awareness and having that regular check-in?
Yeah, and this goes everything from the really deep and meaningful to the tactical. So I'm a big believer that actually one of the best kind of prevention mechanisms for burnout is living a life that's in alignment with who you are and what you want. So it's asking the big questions. If it's helpful to think kind of, when I'm old and grey, when I look back on my life, what do I want to think about what I've done, how I've spent my time? That can often give, I find with my clients, gives them that biggest perspective of, actually, am I living in a way that is aligned with what I want? Because it's very easy, the older we get, you kind of pick up responsibilities and kind of make micro decisions that over time can push you out of alignment, which is why quite often people start to feel the effects of burnout as they transition from 20s of experimentation into 30s of, maybe there's a family involved now, I've got more senior. So asking those questions, I think, is really important. And if you have the opportunity to work with a coach that's skilled, that is money well spent, because that is setting up yourself a success over a lifetime. So there's that piece. If we look more at the tactical side of things, so say we assume you have a life that in its foundations is aligned, you love what you do, then it's getting really real with yourself around, what do I need to be happy and perform at my best? What are those non-negotiables for me? Is it that I need to go to the gym in the morning? Is it that I need regular breaks during the day? Is it that I need to leave early on a Wednesday because it's important to pick the kids up from school? Just really knowing those boundaries and what keeps you healthy, which is typically some form of physical movement, the right nutrition, the basics that we all know, but that it's so easy to slip out of when we're busy and we're committed to what we're doing in life.
Definitely. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? And I definitely found this when I became a mum, but when you start having other responsibilities, or you start, whether it's a family, whether it's moving higher up in your job if you're in corporate, or whether it's when your business is growing and you've got a team and I hear it so often that people feel guilty, or they feel like they're being selfish if they've got those boundaries put up, or if they are taking time out for themselves, or they are doing things in a way that actually enables them to work at their best. And that's what I think it comes down to, is that it's not being selfish, it's actually you putting yourself in a position where you're enabling everyone around you to get the best version of you, and therefore your business is going to get the best version of you, and that's what's really going to make the changes.
Yeah, 100%, because I hear that a lot as well. There's kind of guilt, there's some shame in the mix around having boundaries. But then let's think back to what happened with me. I didn't put up boundaries at work, and ultimately I left that organization versus because I didn't instigate those boundaries. So that company lost someone who ultimately I could have been on the C-suite by now, doing really big things, making them lots of money, versus actually I had to leave that organization to stay well, to heal. So actually sometimes having a boundary is the most selfless thing that you can do, because it means that you're able to show up at work and for your family in a way that you're not able to if you're draining that battery down.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, it goes back to that alignment. Like, we're all different, our boundaries are going to be different. I know some people that love working 4 days a week and they have Fridays off, and that works really well for them. But other people, so for me, I don't do any client work before 10:30, because it means I can do my exercise, I can start my day in the best way. But it means that I'm only really working about 4 hours a day, because then I'll go and pick the kids up. So spread that across the week. So I think it's finding, and it is a bit of kind of test and learn, isn't it? But I think it's about finding what works for you, and going, actually, this is going to enable me to get me in the best possible form, best possible happiness, healthiness. And we know that that has a knock-on effect on productivity and performance. So it makes sense for us to be doing those things, especially if you're running your own business, because you get to choose how you do that. I know it's not as easy when you're, in a corporate job and things where your hours may be more fixed, but having that conversation with your boss and saying, actually, I'd really love to do, an exercise class 3 days a week, first thing in the morning, which means I'm going to come in slightly later. Is that okay? And if you explain why, most people are fairly flexible. I think, especially over the last 2 years, where we've all had to shift boundaries and we've all had to make complete changes to the ways we've been working, especially if we've been juggling other things other than work. And yeah, I think it's just leaning into that and almost not apologizing for it, just having that open dialogue and just saying, look, this is how I'm feeling. Can we test it? Yes, they can say no, of course they can do. But I think putting that and say it and explaining to them how that's going to positively impact them as well as you can have massive changes.
Yeah, and one of the biggest challenges I see is that people just don't have those conversations in the workplace, and it's based on assumptions. People assume that their boss cares about them being available at this big spectrum of times, whereas if they actually have the conversation around, when is it really important that I'm available? And actually, this is something that's important to me. So on Friday at 3 o'clock, it would mean the world to me if I take an hour or so out to be present for the kids, for example.
Yeah.
Most times, unless there's a pressing kind of customer need for you to be visible, then people are okay. But we don't have those conversations for whatever reason. Yeah, quite often we look up to the leaders that do have those boundaries, and that they've got their PA that's making sure that they're well looked after during the day. But actually, you need to put those foundations in place now, because it gets more difficult the kind of more senior you get in the corporate world, the bigger the business that you scale to in the entrepreneurial world.
Definitely. And I think it is reframing things, isn't it? I think in some ways it's not asking for help, it's not showing that you're struggling, it's positioning it in a way that actually you're going to get more out of me because I'm going to be able to perform at my best. And by enabling me to do all of these different things means that, you know, together we can actually get better results. And I think also as a leader, as a business owner, if you are employing a team, of just being mindful of that with your team as well. And I know with my team, it's, you know, we have our different ways of working. Our children are all different ages, and as long as they get their work done and we know what that work is, that's okay. But, you know, I'm happy with that. That's the culture that I want to create within my team. But I think it's not necessarily an easy conversation if things have been going on for a really long time and you've been in your business or your job for a long time, but it can be a complete positive game changer if you do open that dialogue and look at ways that you could potentially improve your performance, improve those results, because you're helping yourself.
Yeah, and it's in those conversations that people develop much deeper relationships, and it's a magical moment if you find a win-win scenario with an employer or with one of your employees that you can make work and personal goals fit together. If we've seen all the headlines around the Great Resignation, this is one of those strategies that actually will have you having really committed employees, team members. Your level of commitment to what you're doing will be much higher when you feel like there's genuine care to know what's important to you and those boundaries are respected.
Definitely. And I think it's a conversation actually that comes up with a lot of my clients, that especially if they're working in the online world a lot, where, you know, we send an email, we expect someone to read it the moment that we've sent it, or someone's posted a comment on social media, we expect people to have seen that straight away. And I think if you start responding instantly, people have that expectation that you are going to respond instantly. So I think it's just, you know, giving yourself, even if you start off by not replying for 2 hours, and just, I know that can be hard sometimes if you just had a message through and you're wanting to reply to a client, but getting them used to the fact that you don't reply instantly, that's okay. Or even if a message comes through at, I don't know, 10:30 at night, 11 o'clock at night, then you don't need to respond to that. Like, wait until the next morning, or set some notifications, or turn your notifications off, even that doesn't come through and you don't even see that until the next morning. You know, no one's going to be kind of worried about that. No one's going to find that irritating, but they will start finding frustration if you're always replying at certain times in the middle of the night or whatever, and then you suddenly stop. So there is that kind of dialogue as well of just, you know, if you are shifting, you're adding, changing your working hours, your boundaries, letting your clients know that, letting your audience know that, and that's okay as well. You know, you don't need to justify what you're doing in your actions, but you should still communicate. You don't need to say why. You can just say, this is my new working hours, or as of whatever date, this is what's going to be happening. But yeah, you don't need to reply instantly. That's definitely something that I see from a lot of people.
Yeah, I like to have windows where I kind of, here's my email responding time, here's my content creation posting time. Don't stick to it 100% of the time, but I find that keeps me more balanced rather than feeling like I've got to be always on all the channels, because it can get overwhelming now. And yeah, social media is another part of the burnout picture. We've dulled so many things, that so many feelings, by scrolling rather than feeling the feeling, completing the cycle on it and moving on.
So true, so true. And I think it is an interesting one where, you know, I love to do time blocking as well, and I recommend it to anybody. But I think the interesting thing with boundaries is that when you have them in place, you get to choose how and when you flex them as well. You know, there will be certain days, I mentioned that I don't see or speak to clients before 10:30, but then I have some clients who are in Asia or Australia. And of course, I'm happy to flex that because of the time difference, but I don't do that every single day. And I think it's it's knowing how and when you can flex that boundary that means that you are still in alignment, that keeps coming up, that word that keeps coming up, that you're enjoying what you're doing, that you're feeling fulfilled, but it's not at the expense of your health.
Yeah. And a good test is, do you feel resentment if you're flexing the boundary, or does it feel really good? When we get in touch with our intuition, it tells us everything. We just spend so much time not in touch with it, I think.
Yeah, that's so true. And actually, one of the things, you know, if you are listening to this and you're thinking about setting some boundaries, play around with them a little bit. You know, lean into that feeling, as you've just said, Emma, around how do you feel? Are you feeling resentment about working weekends? Or are you feeling resentment about working, you know, some evenings? Or are you okay with working one evening? Like, you can play around with it, I think, can't you? There is no hard and fast fixed rule on this. I think it's getting into what works for you, what works for your family, what works for, you know, what you want out of life. That's why we're all doing what we're doing.
Yeah, 100%. We are all different, which is why some people will thrive in a situation where other people absolutely burn out catastrophically. We're all different and looking for different things in life.
We covered so many different things today. It's been amazing. I feel like we could carry on talking on lots of different things. If someone, so I guess kind of some summary really of some kind of key top tips, whether you're wondering whether you have got burnout or you're on that road, but also if people are really feeling like they're at that far end of burnout or about to hit it, what they could do. It'd be great just to kind of get some key top tips.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm going to say come and check out my content, because it goes into everything in
where people can find you
in a lot more detail. So if you look at defeatburnout.com, I've written lots of blogs there, everything from the kind of these are the signs to this is what you can do about it. If I was to give one top tip, it is that creating time for yourself to ask the bigger questions. So to check in with yourself, if there's things coming up that are feeling like they're out of alignment, asking why, and having that perspective of, when I look back in hindsight, what do I want to say about this chapter of life? I find them all to be really powerful tools that you can do on your own, you can do with a coach, or have someone else hold space for you. But that would really be my top tip. Amazing.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I've loved our chat. I think hopefully there's been some good insight for our listeners as well. We will make sure that your links go into the show notes as well, so people can come and find you on defeatburnout.com. But thank you so much for joining me. If you have, as you're listening to this, if you have got any kind of feedback, any thoughts, we would welcome any reviews. So do pop that into our comments. And also, if you're looking to accelerate your results whilst having those healthy boundaries, having that healthy business, then go and check out my free guide as well, which is on my website, sarahcookmarketing.com, and you will find it on there. So defeatburnout.com for Emma's, and then Sarah Cook Marketing. You will find lots of different resources on both of them around how to create that healthy business, which is in alignment to you. Emma, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved our chat.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been amazing.
Thanks for listening to the Healthy Business Podcast. To get your free checklist with 1-minute hacks to accelerate your business and find out more about our community, head to my website, sarahcookmarketing.com/healthy business.